One day, a USPS driver arrives at a house in a remote area to find a man with cold eyes and two frightened twin girls. The girls' demeanor was unusually silent, and their eyes seemed to be pleading for help. But the officer had no evidence, until he drove away from the house and saw a note taped to the bottom of the parcel. After reading it, he realized he had to act immediately. Tom Blake was just an ordinary USPS mail carrier, a modest, unassuming man who carried on his daily round with quiet dedication. Every morning, before the city had fully stirred to life, Tom would awaken to the gentle hum of his alarm and prepare for a day that was, to the outside world, utterly predictable. In his worn but carefully maintained uniform and a cap that bore the faded emblem of the Postal Service, he embodied the very essence of everyday reliability. Tom wasn't a hero in the pages of comic books or a secret agent on daring missions. He was simply a man whose steady presence delivered hope and connection with every piece of mail he bore. On this particular crisp autumn morning, the sky was a soft canvas of pale blue, and a cool breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant promise. Tom loaded his mail truck with the day's parcels, letters, and small packages, each envelope carrying its own little secret: a birthday wish, a handwritten note, or a bill that reminded someone they were loved, or at least remembered. For Tom, the job was more than just a route. It was a quiet ritual of trust. He treated every delivery as an opportunity to serve his community, not because his role was glamorous, but because it was essential. Every doorstep, every porch, every handwritten address was a thread in the tapestry of daily life. As he made his rounds in the suburban neighborhoods, Tom greeted every recipient with a brief nod and a warm smile. He knew many of his regular customers by name, and they in turn would return his smile with palpable gratitude. His was a job of small moments, of exchanging a few words in passing, of noticing the tired look in a neighbor's eyes, or the excited chatter of children anticipating their surprise. Though he rarely thought of himself as extraordinary, his heart was kind and attentively aware of the subtle things that sometimes went unnoticed by those caught up in grander ambitions. Tom's route was long but unremarkable, winding through tree-lined streets and quiet cul-de-sacs. Today, like every day, he followed the familiar pattern of stops: houses built with stories, backyards sheltering laughter, neighborhoods woven together by shared routines. Yet, as the day unfolded, an unanticipated encounter began to disturb the gentle predictability of his afternoon. When Tom's truck finally pulled up to a weathered house far at the edge of a remote neighborhood, there was something about the house that set it apart from all the others he had delivered to that day. The house was modest and a bit isolated, a structure with peeling paint, an unkempt garden where wild roses had taken root, and an overall aura of quiet abandonment. As he got out of his truck and walked up the cracked sidewalk, Tom felt a subtle tension in the air, as if the house itself harbored secrets that the neat rows of suburban homes did not. Reaching the front door with a small package in hand, Tom rang the buzzer. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a scene that made him pause for a moment longer than usual. Standing in the doorway was a man with eyes so cold they seemed to cut through the dim morning light. His face was set in a stern, unreadable expression, and his posture radiated an air of detached authority. But it wasn't just the man that captivated Tom's attention. It was what stood beside him. Two young girls, identical twins by every measure, lingered silently at the side. Their appearance was striking. Each wore an expression of frightened resignation, and their wide eyes, large and sorrowful, conveyed a silent plea that tugged at Tom's compassionate nature. For just a fleeting heartbeat, Tom sensed that something was amiss. He couldn't pinpoint it exactly. A detail in the man's unyielding gaze, a tiny tremor in the twins' still frames, or perhaps the unnerving quietness from the children that was so unusual for young souls. Typically, kids might be loud and playful, perhaps shy if they had been left alone with a stranger. But these girls were unnervingly silent, their eyes almost pleading. That look wasn't simply curiosity or shyness. It felt like a muted cry for help, a silent scream masked behind wide, fearful eyes. Tom handed the package to the man with his habitual politeness, uttering a simple "have a nice day" as he did so. Yet, as he made eye contact with one of the twins, just for a moment, he felt that look again. A look that seemed to silently beg him to notice what wasn't being spoken aloud. There was a weight in that glance. Something that told him that the ordinary might hide an extraordinary sorrow. Tom's heart, always attuned to the quieter details of the human experience, skipped a beat. He couldn't explain it, but every fiber of his being told him that this was not a completely routine delivery. Without lingering long enough to disturb the delicate balance of the moment, Tom stepped back, politely excusing himself, and returned to his truck. He watched as the door closed slowly behind him, the images of that stern man and the silently pleading twin imprinted on his mind. To an outsider, it might have been just another stop on his route. But to Tom, it signified something that transcended a routine delivery. A hint that beneath that quiet facade, hearts might be in peril. Tom drove away from the address with a subtle, nagging sensation that he had encountered more than just a simple wrong address. A faint, inexplicable feeling that something wasn't quite right. The memory of the girl's solemn eyes lingered in his thoughts, mingling with the crisp air outside the truck windows, and it stayed with him as he continued along his route. That encounter marked the beginning of what would become a day unlike any other. A day when even an ordinary postal carrier's intuition would lead him to intervene and change the course of events in a matter of moments. Tom Blake's mail truck rumbled slowly along a narrow, winding road as he approached the address that had given him pause. The route, usually a blur of familiar homes and neat lawns, took a sudden turn into a quieter, almost forgotten corner of the neighborhood. Here, the houses were fewer and farther between, and the one he was approaching stood isolated at the end of a cracked, overgrown driveway. The exterior was worn and weathered, its paint peeling in ragged strips, and the windows darkened as if holding secrets behind their glass. Shadows clung to the eaves, and the sparse light made the house seem more like a relic of another time rather than a warm family home. Tom eased his truck into a spot near the front of the property, careful not to draw too much attention. His heart raced slightly, not from fear of the unknown, but from an instinct honed over years of quiet observation. A subtle, internal warning that something here was off. With his parcel clutched in one hand, he stepped from the truck and walked up the uneven path. Every step he took stirred dry leaves that whispered softly in the chilly breeze, as though nature itself was murmuring secrets about this place. Reaching the weathered front door, Tom rang the buzzer with an automatic politeness that he always maintained, regardless of his gut feelings. The door swung open hesitantly, revealing a scene that sent a shiver down his spine. Standing in the doorway was a tall man with a rigid posture and an expression so stark and unyielding that it made Tom's nerves tighten. The man's eyes were cold, a piercing, emotionless blue that seemed to appraise Tom with a detached scrutiny, as if he were a mere inconvenience rather than a person. There was a hardness about his face, a set of features carved in impatience. Beside the door, almost hidden in the shadows of the entryway, were two young girls, the unmistakable mirror images of each other. The twins stood silently, side by side. Their clothing was neat yet ordinary, and as Tom's gaze met theirs, he was struck by the profound stillness in their eyes. They did not smile, did not speak. Their eyes, wide and trembling, seemed to silently beg for help in a language that words could not articulate. There was something deeply unsettling in their vacant, yet imploring stares, a contrast to the usual lively chatter of children that Tom had seen over the years. Their silence carried a weight, as if their minds were burdened with a secret too heavy to share. For a brief, suspended moment, time seemed to stretch out at that doorstep. Tom extended the package with the practiced ease of a seasoned postal carrier, offering a gentle "here's your delivery" in his soft, unassuming voice. He watched closely as the man took the package with a curt nod. The man's rough hands grasped it, and yet his eyes remained fixed on Tom as though measuring him up for an unspoken verdict. In that fleeting interaction, one of the twin girls, almost imperceptibly, lifted her gaze. Her eyes shimmered with a strange mix of fear and an unspoken plea, a look that felt like a cry for help. It wasn't the lively mischief of a child, but a sorrowful, resigned expression that struck Tom deep in his core. Something in that silent glance, in the quiet, desperate way she looked back at him ignited an urgency within Tom's caring heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary delivery stop. As swiftly as the moment had come, the door closed behind the man, and the quiet of the porch reclaimed the space. Tom hesitated on the doorstep, standing a moment longer than he usually would, trying to digest what he had seen. He looked from the closed door to where the twins had stood, noting how their small figures were framed by the peeling paint and shadowed corners of the entryway. Despite his better judgment and the normalcy he was supposed to expect from his daily rounds, his intuition, that reliable inner voice honed by years of service, screamed that something was not right here. The weight of the twins' silent expressions, mixed with the man's cold, assessing eyes, created an unsettling tableau that refused to allow him the comfort of indifference. Their unspoken cry for help resonated with him in a way that was impossible to ignore. With no time to dwell on it extensively while still on his route, Tom took one last look at the house in the distance, feeling both reluctant and compelled to act. He re-entered his mail truck with the package still in his memory and his mind swirling with questions. He couldn't put into words what exactly had disturbed him, but he knew instinctively that the children's silent, pleading eyes were exactly what heroes sense in the darkest of moments. An unuttered call for rescue hidden behind the facade of an everyday delivery. With a heavy mixture of unease and responsibility, Tom drove away, carrying with him the image of that forlorn moment and a quiet promise to himself that he would not simply forget what he had witnessed. Tom drove away from the house with a mix of unease and routine determination. The image of the cold-eyed man and those silent, pleading twin girls were burned into his memory, a puzzle his caring heart could not easily dismiss. He had finished his delivery with the standard politeness and resumed his route, yet one nagging thought kept tugging at him every time he glanced at the closed door. Somewhere in his mind, he kept replaying the nearly imperceptible look he'd received from one of the twins, a look that had seemed to cut through the usual calm of suburban life. He wondered if he should call someone, if he should even mention it to his supervisor. But the responsibilities of his daily rounds held him in their benign grip, and he chose to trust his instincts until he had more evidence. It wasn't until he returned to the truck at a quiet, isolated stretch of road that something unexpected caught his attention. While Tom was sorting through the day's parcels on the passenger seat, one package, the one delivered to that eerie house, shifted slightly in the dim light of the rearview mirror. Curious, he reached over to inspect the parcel more closely. He flipped the package over, expecting to see nothing more than the usual shipping labels and delivery barcodes. Instead, his fingers brushed against a rough piece of paper, crudely attached to the bottom of the box with a fading strip of adhesive tape. Tom pulled the note free with cautious hands, turning it slowly so that he could read its contents. The paper was thin and slightly wrinkled from exposure, and the ink, hastily scrawled in what looked like angry, trembling handwriting, sent an immediate chill down his spine. It read, "We are girls. Call 911. There was no signature, no further explanation. Just those 6 stark words that seemed to scream for help. Tom's heart began to pound in his chest as he reread the note, trying to process its implications. The simplicity of the message contrasted with the complex, unsettling emotions it awakened. Who were these girls? Were they the same twin girls from the house? And why had they left such a note, almost as if hoping that someone beyond their silent world would notice and act? The note's content verified his suspicions that something was terribly wrong at that address, a situation that was no mere mix-up or misdelivered package. For a long moment, Tom was frozen in a state of internal turmoil. His mind raced through the possibilities. He remembered the 2 girls, so eerily quiet, their eyes masking a profound sadness. Now, with this note in hand, their silent plea took on a tangible form. The note was not an accident or a misprint. It was a desperate message. In that raw, unpolished script, Tom could sense fear and urgency. The national emergency number, 911, was written right there, a straightforward instruction to seek immediate help. The brevity of the message was jarring. Nothing superfluous, just a direct command. It was as if the girls, in their vulnerable state, had managed to communicate what they couldn't say aloud. As the gravity of the note sank in, Tom's thoughts shifted from the routine of his delivery route to instinctive concern. He recalled the unnerving stillness of the twins, the absence of laughter or even childish whispers that he'd come to expect in homes where children lived. Instead, there had been an oppressive silence, as if death or danger had taken the place of innocent play. The cold, imposing figure of the man at the door, too, flashed in his memory. A man whose eyes had held neither warmth nor kindness. Perhaps that was the very source of the fear that now lay hidden behind the note's terse command. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he crumpled the note in his fist and stared out the window at the darkening road ahead. The urge to act was overwhelming. He knew that he wasn't trained for heroics, that he wasn't a cop or a paramedic, but he also knew that in his heart, he could not walk away from a plea for help, especially when it came cloaked in such unmistakable urgency. The note was a cry that demanded to be heard, and the responsibility it carried felt heavier than any package he had ever delivered. An internal debate brewed within him. Should he immediately dial 911 and report what he'd seen, or should he attempt to verify the situation by returning to the address? His mind churned with the realization that if he delayed, the moment for saving those who needed help might pass by indefinitely. The note was his only tangible evidence, proof of neglect or worse, of an impending danger that had not yet been fully exposed. His instincts told him that this was not a case of mistaken delivery or bureaucratic error. It was a silent alarm bell ringing in the dead of an otherwise ordinary day. Tom knew that the decision he had to make was not just about following protocol. It was about following the call of his conscience. He thought of the twins again, their big, haunted eyes silently communicating terror without uttering a single word. With a steadying breath, he reached out for his cell phone. His hands, though still trembling with the adrenaline of rising fear, moved steadily as he dialed the emergency number. Before pressing send on the message or finalizing the call, Tom paused and looked around his truck, at the neatly organized parcels in the back, at the faded interior that had seen countless miles and ordinary days. In that moment, among the everyday remnants of his routine job, lay a stark reminder. Sometimes the deepest, most urgent cries for help come not in grand gestures, but in the smallest pieces of paper attached to a package, in the overlooked corners of a day that otherwise promised nothing more than the mundane. Tom's heart whispered, "Do it. Help them." And without further delay, he pressed the call button and listened as the line connected. His voice, gentle yet trembling with urgency, recited the address and the details of the situation in a measured tone, every word laden with the weight of his discovery. That single act, initiated by a note taped beneath a package, would soon ripple outward, unleashing a chain of events that might just save lives. Sitting in his mail truck with the cool metal of the steering wheel in his hands, Tom Blake felt the weight of the note like a stone in his chest. The words, "We are girls. Call 911," echoed in his mind long after he'd stepped away from that isolated house. Now, as the engine hummed softly and beads of condensation formed on the window in the chilly late afternoon light, Tom's thoughts churned with worry and uncertainty. For a long, agonizing minute he questioned whether he had misread the message. Had the note been intended for someone else? Or was it simply a careless mistake on a misdelivered package? The contents of the paper were so direct and raw that they left no room for ambiguity, yet doubt still crept into his mind. What if the note were a prank? What if the twins, those haunted, silent eyes he'd seen, had been misunderstood, and the man at the door wasn't as menacing as he appeared? His heart and mind wrestled in silent opposition. The rational voice reminded him that mistakes happened, that sometimes things were misprinted or misattached. But his gut, that quiet yet unyielding pulse of intuition honed over years of earnest deliveries and everyday encounters, told him otherwise. Tom closed his eyes and replayed that moment over and over. He remembered the brief flash of pleading in one girl's eyes, a mix of fear and a desperate need for help that seemed wholly out of place. Her gaze, unaccompanied by the usual liveliness of childhood, had become an image burned into his memory. It wasn't something that could be explained away as mere shyness. It was a look that silently screamed, "Save us!" In the solitude of his truck, away from prying eyes and the demands of a routine delivery route, Tom's mind began to race. He leaned back in his seat, his heart fluttering with uncertainty. Am I overreacting? He wondered. In his daily life, he was accustomed to handling small surprises. A missing stamp here, a misaddressed letter there. But this was different. The note was not part of any official mailing protocol. It was raw, written hastily as if in an emergency. His usual confidence, a quiet assurance that he delivered more than packages. He delivered care and connection, now faltered beneath the crushing weight of what could be a serious crisis. A storm of conflicting thoughts roared inside him. On one hand, Tom's logical mind cautioned him, "You're just a mail carrier. You don't have the training, the evidence, or even any responsibility for situations like this." On the other hand, his instinct and compassionate nature roared louder. Someone, somewhere, is reaching out in desperation. Your eyes saw that silent, haunted look. You cannot ignore it. The two voices battled for dominance as he sat there. The interior of the truck dimly lit by the dashboard's soft glow against the creeping dusk outside. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Tom's sense of duty began to banish the nagging doubts. Every fiber of his being recalled the countless hours he had spent delivering hope, each parcel a tiny reminder of how important his work was to those who awaited them. Though he was no hero in the conventional sense, his job had taught him that even the smallest action could mean the difference between silence and salvation. In his heart, he realized that waiting might be a luxury no one in that troubled home could afford. The note was his evidence, however scant, a desperate cry that demanded immediate attention. With trembling fingers resting on his phone, Tom scrolled through his contacts, hesitating between deferring the call for a moment more to verify his suspicions, or to press the emergency button without a second thought. The soft hum of the truck's engine and the quiet murmuring of his own heartbeat filled the stillness. In that intimate solitude, every passing second felt laden with consequence. He remembered all the times he had been taught to trust his gut, to listen to the small, almost silent voices that told him something was wrong. Tom's inner dialogue gradually crystallized the situation. His duty, his humanity, demanded that he prioritize the welfare of those unseen souls behind that faded note. Any lingering doubt was no longer an option when confronted with a potential tragedy. The quiet power of his intuition, combined with the moral urgency of the moment, overwhelmed any residual fear of making an error. In that critical juncture, the rational reservations melted into a clear, resolute determination. Swallowing hard, Tom exhaled deeply and steadied himself. He recognized that sometimes life unexpectedly calls upon even the most ordinary among us to act like someone extraordinary. He felt the sudden, profound responsibility to act on behalf of the silent cry for help, a call delivered through a piece of paper stuck beneath a package. With a calm resolve that surprised even him, he pressed the phone's dial button for 911 and waited as the call connected. Every passing second felt interminable, yet it was filled with a sincere hope that his decision, born from the depths of a compassionate heart, might prevent an unfolding tragedy. Tom's trembling fingers hovered over the phone as the steady dial tone signaled the connection. In that heavy moment, every instinct in his body roared with determination to save lives, even though he was just a mail carrier. With a deep, resolute breath, he pressed 911. The operator's calm, measured voice greeted him, and Tom found himself recounting the haunting details with uncharacteristic urgency. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. Tom's voice came out low but determined as he explained, I'm a postal carrier. I just delivered a package to a remote house and found a note taped beneath it. Says, we are girls. Call 911. There are two little girls at the porch who look terrified and silent. I believe they might be in danger. There was a brief silence on the other end, the quiet punctuated only by the steady hum of the operator's background. Sir, please remain calm. Can you confirm the address for me? The operator requested. Tom quickly scanned his delivery slip, reciting the address in a clear, crisp tone. It's 1423 Briarwood Lane in the outskirts of Pine Hollow, he said. his voice wavering ever so slightly as he visualized the weathered house with peeling paint and overgrown shrubbery. "Thank you. What exactly did you observe when you arrived?" The operator pressed politely yet firmly. Tom recounted every detail. The cold, unobtrusive man at the door, the unnerving stillness of the two twin girls whose eyes had seemed to beg for help, and, most harrowingly, the note taped under the package that simply read, "We are girls. Call 911. His words, though rushed, betrayed the depth of his concern. The operator assured him that help was on the way and advised him to stay on the line until emergency services arrived. As Tom ended the call, a heavy silence descended over him. The sound of the truck's engine and the distant whisper of wind outside were the only counterpoints to the pounding of his heart. Yet he wasn't done. His sense of responsibility did not allow him to merely drive away and leave events to unfold without a peek. Although he knew better than to intervene further, an inner compulsion urged him to check if anyone else might be there in distress. With cautious resolve, Tom parked his truck in a safe, well-lit area some distance from the remote house. His mind replayed the vivid memory of the twins' sorrowful, pleading eyes, a silent clamor that would not let him rest until he was certain that help was near. He locked his truck, grabbed a light jacket, and slowly made his way back along the narrow, leaf-strewn path toward the address he had just reported. The walk was slow and measured, each step punctuated by his internal battle. The need to verify the situation, pitted against the instinct to leave it entirely to the authorities. Every so often, he glanced over his shoulder as if expecting to catch a glimpse of someone following him. The air grew cooler, and even distant sounds, a dog barking, the rustle of leaves, seemed unusually amplified in the quiet isolation. When he reached the house again, his pulse quickened. The front door now stood closed and silent like a secret vault, the overgrown driveway vacant except for the memories of his earlier visit. Tom's cautious eyes scanned the entire porch area. The place was eerily empty of any immediate struggle. No shattered glass, no obvious signs of disturbance. Yet the lingering note, taped beneath an innocuous-looking parcel, remained as evidence of that desperate plea. In his mind, the record was clear. The two twin girls, the man at the door, the distress in those silent eyes, all painted a picture of a household on the brink of crisis. Unsure if waiting outside for help was enough, Tom decided to circle around the property to see if any subtle clues might spark further confirmation. His footsteps were nearly invisible against the soft carpet of scattered autumn leaves. Every creak of the old wooden steps, every whisper of the wind in the brittle bushes, filled him with apprehension. He moved like a cautious observer rather than an intruder, determined to gather any last details before returning to his truck and handing over every shred of information he possessed. At the rear of the house, near a side window that was partly obscured by hanging ivy, Tom noticed a fleeting glimmer, a flash of movement that could have been a curtain shifting in the breeze. He squinted, his heart resounding louder with each beat, until he could see nothing more definitive than a suggestion of something amiss. The weight of his responsibility was heavy. He knew that any delay might cost the children precious time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of tense searching, he retraced his steps back to where he had initially parked his truck. His mind churned with conflicting emotions, relief that he felt something was indeed wrong, and the lingering fear that his actions might be construed as meddling. But the clarity bestowed by the 911 operator and the certainty in his own gut left him with no real choice. The evidence, as scant as it might have been, a desperately written plea on a plain sheet of paper accompanied by those ghostly, knockdown looks in innocent eyes, demanded that he do his part. Back in his truck, Tom quickly dialed the operator's number again to offer any additional details he might have inadvertently gathered from his brief inspection of the property. "I'm still near the location," he said in a subdued yet urgent tone, "and I just returned after checking around. Everything seems quiet, but the note remains, and I'm really worried about those children." The operator reassured him that an emergency unit was already on its way, advising him to remain in a safe area until they arrived. The sound of distant sirens began to waver through the crisp air, growing steadily louder, until they reached the vicinity of the remote house. With a final glance at the address, a place that had momentarily shattered the monotony of his routine, Tom returned to his truck, his face set with the quiet determination of someone who had chosen to heed a silent call for help. Today, Tom Blake, a humble USPS mail carrier with no heroic accolades to his name, had taken the small yet crucial step of bridging silence and action. He now understood that sometimes, even the seemingly insignificant details, a hastily scrawled note, a look in a child's eyes, can herald events that demand immediate, compassionate intervention. As Tom sat in his truck watching the distant wail of sirens growing steadily louder, his heart pounded in a mix of dread and cautious hope. The emergency dispatch had confirmed that officers were en route, and now their flashing lights pierced the late afternoon gloom along the remote driveway. The once quiet neighborhood, marked by the worn facade of the isolated house on Briarwood Lane, suddenly transformed into a stage for an unfolding drama that neither Tom nor anyone else could have anticipated. Within minutes, the rumble of police vehicles drew near. Several squad cars pulled up along the overgrown pathway, their lights dancing against the peeling walls of the house. Tom observed from the safety of his truck as uniformed officers, faces set with determined focus, advanced toward the front door. His heart sank and lifted all at once. He hoped that help would bring relief to those who had silently pleaded for it. Almost simultaneously, the door burst open. A team of officers, some wearing tactical vests and others with radios clipped to their uniforms, surged into the entryway. Their coordinated movement left no room for delay or misinterpretation. The sound of shouts and commands filled the air as the officers quickly secured the premises. The stern, cold-eyed man who had earlier accepted the package was apprehended with little resistance, a motion that suggested he had long grown accustomed to his repressive routine. His face, once unyielding and detached, now betrayed a flash of panic as he was ordered to sit and wait on the spot. Inside the dim interior of the house, the scene was one of eerie silence and latent distress. Following the officer's commands, a search team began methodically sweeping through the property. In a narrow, sparsely furnished room tucked away behind a creaking door, the officers discovered the two twin girls. They were huddled together on a threadbare sofa, their small bodies trembling with fear. The girls' faces, illuminated in the harsh glare of the searchlights, still held that same haunted, silent plea that had first moved Tom. Their eyes, wide and red-rimmed, hinted at an experience too burdensome for children their age. One of the officers knelt down gently near the twins, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "Hey, sweetheart, it's okay. You're safe now. We're here to help," he murmured. The girls' tense features slowly began to relax under the officer's calm attention, though the silence between them spoke of words too difficult to express in that moment. With delicate care, the children were helped into the arms of the responders and taken to a safer area within the house, where they would soon receive proper care and counseling. In the course of the search, investigators uncovered evidence of neglect and concealed abuse in the house. Overturned personal belongings, scattered drawings with cryptic messages, and a collection of hastily hidden belongings that suggested the children had been forced into a life of emotional isolation. Among these items was a crumpled photograph of a smiling family from long ago, an image that contrasted sharply with the grim reality the officers now faced. It was a silent testament not only to what the girls had lost but to the unspoken truth hidden in the shadows of that home. As forensic experts meticulously documented the scene, questions began to mount. Neighbors who had occasionally passed by hinted at noticing unusual activity years before, the absence of regular school attendance, sporadic sounds of distress during quiet hours, and even the infrequent appearance of the cold-eyed man, whose identity was now under intense scrutiny. The investigation would soon reveal that the children's situation was far more complex than anyone had imagined. For years, their home had been shrouded in a veil of secrecy, preserving a facade of normalcy while hiding a tragedy that had silently unfolded behind closed doors. Later, as the police assembled outside the house and began taking statements from local witnesses, Tom sat in his truck, his hands still trembling on the steering wheel. He could hear the murmurs of relief mixed with sorrow as neighbors discussed the unfolding events. It became clear that the note, that desperate, hastily attached message saying, "We are girls. Call 911." was the only message these vulnerable children had been able to send. In that small, frantic piece of paper lay the key to their rescue. A plea that pierces the silence of everyday life and transformed an ordinary delivery into a race against time. A detective, speaking quietly to a colleague, confirmed that the evidence pointed to years of neglect under the supervision of an individual who had assumed control over the household, using fear and isolation to keep the children silent. There was a disturbing pattern emerging. The man had exploited his authority to keep them hidden from the outside world, with the twins' quiet eyes now serving as the final, desperate testimony of their suffering. No one had known the true extent of their plight until now. Inside the police command center set up on the property, officers and investigators began piecing together the narrative of a hidden danger that had somehow been allowed to persist. The swift intervention not only prevented a possible escalation into further tragedy, but also shone a light on systemic failures that had kept these children marginalized and voiceless for far too long. The home, once a silent witness to their pain, had become a focal point for a renewed commitment to ensuring that every child is protected, that every cry for help is never missed again. For Tom, the day's events crystallized into a profound realization. Even a humble mail carrier, often unnoticed by the grand narratives of life, possessed the insight and compassion necessary to change fate. His decision to act on that haunting note had set in motion a chain of events that rescued two frightened souls and exposed a hidden chapter of despair. In that moment, amid the flashing lights and the commotion of emergency responders, Tom Blake silently vowed that he would never again overlook the subtle signs of suffering. He had witnessed firsthand that heroism does not always come clad in uniforms or celebrated in headlines. It can emerge quietly, insistently, from the heart of anyone willing to listen. In the days following that fateful afternoon, the once quiet neighborhood of Briarwood Lane buzzed with news and questions. The police investigation revealed a harrowing story of prolonged neglect and secrecy. The twin girls, once hidden away in silence, were now receiving the care and the protection they had been so desperately denied. Their rescuer, the unassuming mail carrier Tom Blake, had unwittingly become the catalyst that brought light into a dark and isolated household. Before long, local news outlets began picking up the story. Headlines in community papers and television broadcasts read along the lines of "Mail carrier saves children with a single note" and "Humble delivery sparks life-saving intervention." Tom's simple act of noticing a hastily taped plea on the underside of a package had prevented a looming tragedy and exposed a hidden chapter of cruelty that had gone unnoticed for far too long. Neighbors who once scarcely knew his name now recognized him, some with tears in their eyes and others with grateful smiles, for his willingness to do what many might have overlooked. On a crisp morning a week later, Tom found himself in a modest conference room at the local police headquarters. A group of reporters had gathered, and amid the flashing cameras and earnest questions, the local sheriff stepped forward and extended a sincere thank you on behalf of the entire community. "We often think heroes are born in moments of dramatic excess," the sheriff said, his voice resonating with genuine emotion. "But sometimes, true heroism is found in the quiet vigilance of an everyday person." Today, Tom Blake reminded us that paying attention to the smallest details can save lives. Surprisingly, Tom's face remained as modest and unadorned as ever. When asked about his actions, the mail carrier simply offered a soft, almost sheepish smile. "I just did what anyone should do if they see something isn't right," he said in a tone devoid of self-aggrandizement. "I listen to those silent cries for help, whether it's hidden in a note or in the eyes of someone who can't speak out." His candor and unpretentious honesty struck a chord with the audience, both in the room and the thousands watching on television. Social media quickly amplified his story. Strangers, inspired by his quiet act of courage, began sharing their own accounts of seemingly insignificant moments that, when given attention, led to meaningful change. Messages of gratitude poured in from across the nation, with people writing, "If only more of us could be as caring and observant as Tom." And this is proof that heroes aren't made of capes and superpowers, they're made of heart. At a subsequent press conference held at the headquarters of USPS, Tom was invited to receive a small token of appreciation from his employer, a commendation for his exemplary service and his unwavering commitment to community welfare. In his short, impromptu remarks, he maintained that he was just doing his job. He added quietly, "I'm no one special. I'm a mail carrier who happens to notice when something isn't right. I believe in looking closely, not only at the addresses and parcels I deliver, but at the people behind them. When a child's eyes beg silently for help, you do what is right. No questions asked." Despite the accolades and the national headlines, Tom's humility remained unshaken. In one interview, when asked whether he felt different now that his actions had received recognition far beyond his everyday route, he simply replied, "I'm still Tom Blake, a guy who drives a mail truck. I never set out to be a hero. I just did what my heart told me was right. Anyone in my position would have done the same. It's not about being famous or celebrated. It's about paying attention to the silent calls for help in our midst." His statement resonated deeply with countless viewers and readers, reaffirming the sentiment that heroism isn't confined to extraordinary feats or special training. It lies quietly in the everyday choices of those who notice the overlooked details. His simple act had set off a cascade of changes. Investigations were launched to review the welfare of other vulnerable individuals at similar addresses, and newfound emphasis was placed on training postal workers and other community professionals to be more alert and compassionate. Back on his daily route, Tom kept a low profile. He continued to deliver his parcels as he always had, with the same measured steps and the same attentive glance at each door. His truck bore no signs of decoration or metal. It was an ordinary vehicle carrying ordinary packages on an ordinary day. Yet, for those whose lives were touched by his small act of vigilance, Tom Blake had redefined what it meant to be a hero. His story, ignited by a simple, desperate note taped beneath a package, proved that even in a world of routine and repetition, one person's empathy could spark monumental change, and even stop tragedy in its tracks. As the nation celebrated the quiet courage of a mail carrier, Tom's own words continued to echo, "I just did what anyone would do if they cared enough to look." His modesty and truth cut through the noise of grand gestures, reminding us all that the power to save lives is never out of reach, even for those who walk among us, unadorned by the trappings of conventional heroism. Subscribe if you believe that heroism lies not in grandeur or accolades, but in the simple act of listening to the silent pleas of those in need, and that every one of us has the power to change the world by paying attention.